It takes sitting down, realizing that's where the rubrics also come in. Where are they lacking? Why did they not pass this? It's not just, yeah, they're terrible, right? No, people have to be taught things. So it's about where did they go wrong? What can we improve on? And what activity will highlight that?
Hey there, my name's Ashley Church.
And I'm Erin West.
We were once newly promoted crime scene and latent print supervisors on mutual struggle buses as we both simultaneously tried to navigate through the challenges within our forensic units.
Now we run a business where we create tools and resources that we wish we had had to make these transitions easier. We like to talk about the experiences we've had in the forensic field, the good, the bad, and the ugly, in the hopes to create awareness around these issues and move the needle forward to create positive change in the forensic community.
So if you're a forensic professional, regardless of your years of experience, who's not afraid to dive into real, raw, and sometimes uncomfortable topics, you're in the right place.
This is the Forensics Unfiltered podcast.
Welcome back to Forensics Unfiltered. Today we are bringing you something special. It's a presentation straight from our Forensic Trainer Symposium. If you have ever found yourself thinking, how do I make training exercises stick, have higher retention with our trainees instead of just going through the motions, this episode is for you. In this episode, we're throwing it over to Dr. Heidi Sievers, a Bloodstain Pattern Expert and all-around forensic training powerhouse, to talk about how to design training exercises that actually make a lasting impact. If you don't know Heidi yet, you're in for a treat. She's a PhD holding, IAI certified boss in bloodstain pattern analysis and crime scene work. Plus, she's trained law enforcement and military agencies worldwide. This session was originally part of the Forensic Trainer Symposium, a 3-day virtual event we hosted to help forensic trainers build stronger, more effective training programs. If you missed it live, you can still grab the replays. 15 expert presentations, 6 live workshop replays, and more waiting for you in the show notes. All right, let's dive into training with a purpose, creating exercises for maximum impact with Dr. Heidi Sievers. Before we start this episode, our guests would like to share a disclaimer that the opinions shared are their own and not representative of their current or past employment. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Hi guys, welcome back to the 2024 Forensic Trainer Symposium. We are so excited to have you guys here with us. And today we have a very special guest, Dr. Heidi Sievers from Sievers Forensics. Welcome, Heidi.
Thank
She's back
you.
again with us. So we're so pumped to have her here. Obviously, this conference is all about training and being a better trainer and building a better training program. And I have recently taken one of Heidi's advanced bloodstain classes, and she is incredible at putting together activities to teach topics that are actually very impactful in the learning process. So we thought, what a great person to talk to you guys about building activities inside of your training program. But before we dive into that, Miss Heidi, give them a little bit of background of your experience in forensics and where you are now.
Sure. So I started with a law enforcement agency, Central West Florida, as a forensic investigator and a cadaver canine handler. And even there, I started specializing in bloodstain pattern analysis, and then I moved on to academia. So right now, I am up to 5 universities that I teach at, in person and online: crime scene technology programs, forensic science programs, criminal justice programs. And I also operate Sievers Forensics. So we provide bloodstain pattern analysis, consultation, and training to law enforcement agencies, attorneys within the US and internationally. So now, as an independent contractor, consultant, whatever word you want to use, we're providing expert consult on bloodstain cases and then doing trainings just like the one you took, Erin, recently.
Yeah, good class. 10 out of 10 would recommend.
Thank you. Yeah.
If you're looking for a bloodstain class.
Yeah. Even though I made you work
Awesome.
first and get all bloody, but
Yep, for sure. All right. So many of you guys are here with the hopes of revamping your training program, becoming better trainers. And one of the really important things in your training program is including activities that really help them learn the different concepts. And so, Heidi, in your experience, do you think that having really meaningful activities is beneficial to the training and learning process when people are learning a new skill?
yeah, absolutely. And really any skill that it is, whether it be something like bloodstain pattern analysis or identification, interpretation, whether it be fingerprint processing, models, how to collect swabs, whatever it is from novice to advanced. And even if it is someone freshly into a unit or has been there a while and is learning a new skill, you have to have that hands-on component to really bridge the gap between the fundamental basics of what your training manual says or books say, whatever treatises you use as a foundation, and what the real world application is. Because a lot of these people, whether they are freshly in FTO, new investigators, or whether they've been in a unit for a while and they're learning a new skill, or they haven't practiced that skill in a while, this is something brand new to them, and trying to bridge that gap between what does this piece of paper say and how does it actually apply. A lot of times that gets disconnected. So I'm a big proponent of anything that you can have a hands-on activity for, you should do it.
And that really engages them more in their learning process, right?
Yeah, and it just makes them more excited about learning, right? So obviously, I mean, I'm biased, but I like to think my specialty is pretty exciting. I usually don't get a lot of complaints of people throwing blood around and playing with it, but I know it's not for everybody, but usually in my experience, everyone is so excited about that part of it, right? So a lot of times early on in training, you have to read the manual, you got to listen to the PowerPoints, you got to look at the handouts, and that's just part of it. There's really no way around that because they need that foundation. They kind of need that scientific background of it, their research, theoretical foundations of it. But talk about a snoozer if that's all it is like, here, read this pamphlet on bloodstain pattern analysis. All right, we're going to move on to the next thing. Right? That's not fun. You want to get people engaged in their training. And I think for anyone that's been through FTO, it's exciting because you're new in this career and you're getting to learn all these new things, but it also is not the most fun time, right? Like you're reading a lot, you're learning a lot. Sometimes you feel like you're a little held back. So you have to keep them engaged and interested, especially because our field has such a high rate of burnout. You don't want to start them with kind of the breadcrumbs of burnout that early on. So you have to make it fun and engaging and not just sitting at a desk reading paper all day.
I love that. So walk us through, because your classes involve a lot of activities,
Yes.
Like a lot of activities. Every single day there were activities that were happening. And obviously that takes a lot of time and effort and thought process into, providing those. So walk us through kind of your process of designing activities, like how you decide where they're appropriate to put activities, and your thought process behind like the actual activity.
Yeah, sure. So for me, for my training classes, right, which similarly mirror that of, a training program, or at least a unit in a training program, I go through and I look at my outline, right, or my syllabi or whatever it may be that is going to be the structure of my class. And I go through there with really a fine-tooth comb and I highlight every single place that I can incorporate something hands-on, whether it be something small or whether it be something long and drawn out, like you guys did with the experimentation. That's probably the most in-depth activity that I have. So I go in there and I see every little place that I can incorporate something in, because not only does it reinforce what I'm lecturing about, but it also breaks up the monotony of reading and death by PowerPoint and things like that. Even though I like to think I'm entertaining and kind of funny, but no one likes to hear me talk for that long. So first I go through and I look at all the different places that I feel like I could incorporate something. And yes, it does take a lot of time. So just know that it's not just, throw something together real quick. It takes intentionality, it takes time, it takes prep. First I go through and I kind of highlight or star everywhere, every learning objective that I think I could fit in something. And then I just have to sit there and critically think, Okay, well, we're talking about pattern identification. What could we do to reinforce pattern identification, right? And for me, I always like to have kind of a two-step approach to it. I think you can always go beyond just flashcards of bloodstains and what is this? What is this, right? Yeah, that's cool, but it's not the most exciting thing in the world, right? And I'm a big proponent of teaching everyone in various ways. So yes, it's important to be able to look at a blood stain, look at the physical characteristics of it, what it looks like, and identify it. But students are going to learn more if they can see how those patterns are created, right? So I'll have an identification station, but then I'll also have something where they're creating patterns, they're creating impact, they're creating cast off, they're creating drip trails and drip stains and satellite spatter. And then they're seeing it from both sides. They're seeing how it was actually created, and they're also seeing how to identify it, how to work through it once it's already deposited. So sometimes I'll go through and I'll have two different activities looking at it through different lenses. And sometimes, after I go through, I'm like, yeah, that's too much. And I might get rid of an activity. But for the most part, I kind of word vomit on my outline of all the different things that we can do. Then it's really the prep, right? So then it's thinking, okay, well, how can I set this up in a way that is somewhat streamlined for me, but also makes sense to them, right? You don't want to inundate them with so much hands-on work that they're like, okay, yeah, I'm over it, right? You want to keep them wanting the next piece of information. The way I structure my classes is, for example, mathematics day, everyone always starts out grumbling, groaning, like they're probably 5 minutes late. They don't want to do it, right? Yeah. But by the end of it, they're like, okay, I want to know more. I want to know how to do that. And the way I do that is I baby step it. And usually when I give the lecture, they're sitting there like, I didn't pay attention in trigonometry in high school. I'm not paying attention now. But I baby step it with, okay, well, first we're just going to practice literally using our calculator. Can we even put the formula in our phone, in our calculator, and get the right result, right? And then we practice measuring stains because that's the majority of errors happen there. So then we practice just measuring stains where I know the answer, I created them, I've already calculated them, and then they go through that. And you can see that they get excited to see how close they are with measurements. All right, well then from there, then they get a large impact pattern. Okay, so now they have to go through and choose their stains, they have to measure, then they're determining their area of convergence on a two-dimensional place. And you can still see that nervousness, excitedness to see how close they were, if they got that right. Once they get that right, then they move on to the next part of mathematically calculating area of origin. Then they move on to stringing, right? So I kind of baby step it to where they're always wanting the next piece. When you just give them everything in one go, which, yeah, that could be way easier for me, right? Here's one pattern I have to make, do everything, and then we'll see how you did. But that doesn't teach them anything because at the end, they could tell me, well, I got an area of origin of 13 inches and the answer is 5. Okay, so that's wrong. And granted, I give them charts to kind of track it, but then it's very frustrating for them to try and go back and see what they did wrong, right? I can sit there with them and say, hey, it looks like maybe your measurements are off. I would redo that. But if you baby step it, then they can easily identify and master one step at a time. And that's the part that takes a lot of time, is not just throwing together mock scenes. It's let's take it step by step. So that way, when you get to the end, you feel confident in every other part of this process.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned a good thing there. There's probably people listening to this being like, ain't nobody got time for that. Like, right. I barely have time for them to shadow me, let alone design all these exercises for them. But I think it's really important as trainers to remember that these people are your future coworkers. And so like the effort that you take to make sure that they really have these concepts down is going to benefit you in the long run, because if you shortcut them and they get out of training and they don't solidly have these concepts down, guess who's going to drag that extra weight around for the rest of the time they're with you? It's you. So 100%. It really is worth designing stuff like this so that they can solidify all their concepts. And then when they do get out of training, they're a true benefit to the team. So you don't necessarily do this in a training class, but in a training program, you would absolutely need to grade exercises. Maybe not all activities, like some activities are probably just for the sake of them being able to practice things. But at some point, we would have to test through some kind of practical exercise that they can actually do this thing and do it correctly. And so when that is the case and these exercises have to be graded, what kind of things would you suggest for someone to be able to grade an actual physical activity component of a training program?
Right. So something that I do is I'm a big rubric grader. That's probably the academic in me coming out a little bit. I feel like I just am haunted by rubrics everywhere. So I'm a big rubric grader because I think not only does that allow an easy way to kind of pass fail, but it also provides your trainee with something to look at rather than, yep, you failed, just, go home. Like rather than that, they're actually getting feedback of what components they need to work on, even if they did pass, right? Even if they pass, they got the minimum score and they're able to move on to the next thing. Everyone can always improve, right? So, I mean, maybe they're getting 5s across the board, but for me, everyone says I'm a little bit of a harsh grader. Even if they are getting 5s across the board, I'm still going to have an area of improvement section, right? So they are able to still learn from a rubric rather than, just from my FTO days, just like, yep, sign off. All right, you're good to go. Especially if you're not an FTO that's good at having those conversations, and sometimes it's an awkward conversation, you have something to work off of, right? If they have an area that needs to be improved, say, hey, you did great at this, but in critical thinking or pattern identification or, bloodstain mathematics, this is where we're lacking, right? And for things like that, such as, bloodstain mathematics, area of origin, area of convergence, I'll give them a range. So typically in a training setting, if I made a pattern at 7 inches away, I'll give them a leeway of an inch either way. So anywhere from 6 to 8. And then we'll go from there. And if they didn't get that, right, if they got 4, then I let them know it's graded accordingly, and then remedial actions from there if they need to redo it or whatever it may be. But I think it's important that once you get to that grading aspect, especially if it's pass fail with remediation, that they understand what they did wrong, because as someone who, all of us have been through FTO at some time, and I've been through FTO and was told like, yeah, no, you did it wrong. But I don't know what part of it, like, was the whole thing wrong from the time I just stepped out of the van? I was just doing things wrong. Like, what part did I do wrong, and what parts did I maybe do okay? Even if I didn't do anything great, did I do anything okay? And what specifically was kind of my downfall there? So I think that's important, because you brought up a good point of keeping them motivated, and nothing removes motivation from a trainee than just saying, yeah, you're wrong. And again, that takes time. It takes intentionality from an FTO. So in my training classes, in the one you were in, I had more people in that training class than I've ever had, over 30, right? And that's a lot for an advanced class. But when they're like, hey, for my area of origin, I got 15 inches and the answer is 5, right? I can't just be like, nope, look back at it again.
Do it again, yeah.
Do it again. Okay, well, where do I start, right? So I take the time and I sit down, I look at their calculations, I look at their chart, I look at their pattern, the stain they've chosen, the area of convergence they've created, and we troubleshoot it together, because it makes them feel like they're not alone, and it actually gives them somewhere to start. When you just say, do it again, that's a lengthy process. And maybe whatever they did for you, fingerprint processing, whatever it may be, could be a lengthy process. And just saying, yeah, do it again. Like the whole thing was wrong. Well, now they feel like they've done everything wrong. And that's probably not the case. I mean, maybe it is, but for the most part, that's probably not the case. There probably is something they did correctly. So I'm a big proponent of rubrics, and not a one-size-fits-all rubric based on the activity you're doing. So the rubric's going to be different, right? The rubric's going to be different for mathematical calculations. So that might be, stain selection. It might be measurements of stains. It might be determining area of convergence. And then I have categories, right? So, is it more than 3 inches away from where area of convergence should be? Is it, more than 5 inches away? Whatever it may be in those categories, or is it within a half an inch? And have different categories for different activities. And I know people are probably like, oh, great. Now you want us to not only make different activities, but different rubrics. But like you said, in the long run, it's going to make such a difference. And as an FTO, as a manager, you know how important documentation is. And just improving the documentation of, this is exactly where they went wrong. I have it documented. I have it noted that they were told exactly the part that they did incorrectly, and that's what we did remedial on. It just overall just makes it way better in the long run.
Yeah, for sure. And then let's talk about remediation for just a little bit, because I think something we commonly see through teaching FTOs is that people don't really know how to remediate. So if someone fails a section, they will have a tendency, like you said, to just be like, do it again, not really digging down into what the core issue is, or taking the time to design additional activities to assist them with the one problem area. So if you find someone that is struggling with something, that they need to be remediated on some piece, what do you do in those circumstances?
Have you ever set up a mock crime scene for training and just laugh? Because let's be honest, I don't know about your mock scenes, but most of ours are far from realistic. We'd grab a stuffed dummy, throw some evidence on the floor, and call it a day. And where would we set it up? A training room, a hallway, maybe an empty office. But in the real world, crime scenes don't happen in sterile, well-lit spaces. And they definitely don't come with obvious clues. On top of that, we didn't even have a storage room to house a bunch of mock scene props. We had one little cabinet. So we'd have to set up and take down the scene every day. Trainees halfway through, better wrap it up by the end of the shift or tear it down to set it all back up tomorrow. That's why we knew we needed to find a better way. Immersive virtual reality mock crime scenes. No setup, no cleanup, just instant access to realistic, interactive mock crime scenes that actually challenge your trainees' observational and critical thinking skills. Want to see it in action? Join our free webinar. You'll learn how to replace outdated setups with cost-effective, high-impact training that's accessible from anywhere. I'll make sure to include the link in the show notes so you can get instant access to this webinar right now.
If you find someone that is struggling with something, that they need to be remediated on some piece, what do you do in those circumstances?
Sure. So yeah, like you said, it takes intentionality. I talk a lot on kind of all my platforms about intentionality and what you're doing. And you can't just say, just do it over, right? Because they didn't get it the first time. So without any other direction, they're probably not going to get it the second time, right? Unless they just had a bad day. So it takes sitting down, realizing that's where the rubrics also come in. Where are they lacking? Why did they not pass this? It's not just, yeah, they're terrible, right? No, people have to be taught things. So it's about where did they go wrong? What can we improve on? And what activity will highlight that, right? And that's something I do in my training. So in all my training classes, yeah, I have a structure of how the whole week is going to go. But sometimes I have to roll with the punches. And if the whole class is not really getting the interpretation of stains, okay, well, now I have to incorporate another mock scene. And I kind of just have them in the back of my head and prepared, ready to go if I need to include one. But if your trainee or your training class or whatever it may be is struggling with one particular area, you can't just be like, wow, that's not on my schedule for today, right? We have to address these problems before we can go on. For example, like if I have a trainee or I have, for me, like a mentee, right? Because I take mentees. If I have a mentee that is really struggling with interpretation, with just the interpretation of stains, what they mean, the information they give us relating to a crime scene, well, the number one way to practice that is case studies, right? So I can show them pictures of stains all day long. They probably are fantastic at identification, but just because you can identify stains doesn't mean you understand the interpretation of what they mean in that scenario, because they all have different meanings per scenario. So what do? Okay, case studies. The perfect remedy for that is case studies. But I don't just say, hey, here's 5 case studies. Tell me what you think. No, clearly they're having issues. So now I need to sit with them, walk them through each one, right? So the first one I do myself. I kind of present it to them. I show them little things. And then the next one we do together. And then the next one, they take the lead and I assist. And then maybe the next one, they do it on their own and they present it to me. And then you can see kind of, we're letting go of that leash, that, the little baby leash is getting longer and longer and longer until they're able to break free. I think when you have a trainee that is really struggling in one specific area, You have to look at them as a person and not just, well, the last trainee I had that had problems with this, I did this, but that might not fit their issue, you know? So I think it really is about individuality of that person.
Yeah.
And having a conversation with them. I think just talking with them and saying, what about this is the hardest part for you? You know, and they might say something that you're like, oh, I didn't even realize you were struggling with that. And then you can kind of tailor something from there.
Yeah, I love that. So you really don't have to remediate. And you said this earlier, that if you're telling them that they're struggling, they're probably not struggling with everything. So you don't have to remediate the whole phase, the whole module, like everything about processing, everything about bloodstain or trajectory or whatever you're teaching them. There probably are a few, like one or a few just core concepts that you can really focus in on that will correct the issue as a whole. So that's awesome. Thanks for all these great nuggets today.
Yeah.
All right. So if they would like more, Heidi, where can they find you in your classes and consulting and all of that?
Sure. So they can find me at sieversforensics.com. That's going to have all my contact info for consultations. It's going to have a list of all my webinars, all my in-person classes that I offer. And you can also follow along if you are on LinkedIn. You can find me under Heidi Sievers or under Sievers Forensics. And if you are on Instagram, you can find me under the Bloodstain Doc. And I post a lot of my training courses and little nuggets of information specifically about bloodstains kind of out there in the universe for anybody. And if you ever have any questions about anything training related or need an idea, especially for a bloodstain activity, feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Miss Heidi.
Thank you for having me again.
Yes, we hope that you guys are really enjoying the symposium and that you enjoy the rest of the classes, and we'll see you at the next one.
What a great presentation with Dr. Heidi Sievers, packed with practical strategies for how to take your forensic training from boring and forgettable to engaging and effective. If you love this, I've got good news for you. There's way more where that came from in the Forensic Trainer Symposium replays. We're talking 15 expert presentations, 6 live workshop replays, and Q&As with some of the best in the business. So if you're ready to build better forensic training programs, and honestly, why wouldn't you be? Grab the replays. All the details are in the show notes. And make sure you come back next week because we're keeping the training momentum going. We'll be sitting down with Alice White to talk about how to rethink your hiring process and recruit top-tier forensic trainees. You don't want to miss it. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on Forensics Unfiltered. Thank you so much for being here and listening to Forensics Unfiltered. If you liked this episode, would you do us a favor and leave a review letting us know specifically what you liked about this topic? It will only take a minute, but it will really help us plan future episodes so we can bring you more topics that you want to listen to. We'll be sure to provide any links from today's episode in our show notes on our website. Head to www.gapscience.com. Until next time, stay safe out there.